empire, long divided, must unite. A great dynasty burns.
Whoa. So, due to an embargo leak, it seems like Total War 3 Kingdoms has been announced a whole day early. It was supposed to be announced tomorrow, but I guess we're talking about it now. So this is going to be the next big major Total War title. It is set during the Three Kingdoms period of China, which is sort of the late 100s up through the 200s AD. For those of you who might not know, Three Kingdoms is kind of the era for a Chinese historical Total War, at least if we're looking at ancient China, in my opinion. You know, if you think about with Japan, the no-brainer is the Sengoku Jidai. I'd say the Three Kingdoms, there's a couple other contenders, but the Three Kingdoms is basically the no-brainer era if you're going to do an ancient Total War game set in China. This is one of the ones I've predicted is going to be coming for a while. I actually didn't predict that it was going to be this next one. I thought that maybe they were doing something with the ancient Near East or possibly another gunpowder game, but nonetheless, I'm very excited about this. I guess I'd call myself a novice in Chinese history. I've studied it at like kind of a foundational, 100, 200 level, but am by no means an expert, so I'm looking forward to reading up more on this era and sort of learning along with you guys, probably learning from some of you guys who know more about it than I do, because it's really fascinating when you first start to step into Chinese history and realize how broad and deep it really is. It's kind of like for a Westerner who grew up in the Western education system, taking your first steps into ancient Western history, which is obviously something I fell in love with. So it's this whole other world over there. It's going to be really cool. Different units, different weapons, different political schemes is going to sort of, depending on how they decide to handle it, I think it could create some very interesting new gameplay. The one thing that I'm kind of curious about, there's sort of Three Kingdoms that exist, at least in the modern consciousness. There is the historical era of the Three Kingdoms, which is really rich and interesting by itself. And then there's the sort of literary Three Kingdoms, which is largely based on the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms by I believe Luo Guanzhong is how you pronounce his name. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Which is a novel that was written during the Ming Dynasty about the Three Kingdoms period, and that's where we get a lot of, like the Dynasty Warriors games and these legends about Lu Bu and Cao Cao and, the Garden Oath and all these iconic moments that, some of them do have precedent in actual historical documents, but a lot of it has been sort of mythologized. And especially, based on this trailer, seeing, these badass larger-than-life figures charging through and messing a bunch of people up, I'm very curious how much this game is going to skew towards hard, settled history and how much of it is going to skew towards the literary tradition and the mythology surrounding the Three Kingdoms period. Are we going to see heroes that are more like Warhammer, where they're, they can take on a whole unit by themselves and they're basically invincible? Or are they going to be more like, Shogun 2, where they're very powerful, but you still kind of want to protect them because they're people and they can die from a stray arrow if you get unlucky? Personally, as a history fan, I'd love that if they would go more towards the settled history, but knowing the era, I think we're probably going to get at least some elements of, that mythologizing and that literary tradition, which honestly isn't too bad of a thing, even if it's not how I personally would do it if I were at the helm of this project. So we don't know much else yet, but we'll definitely be keeping an eye on it. So subscribe to hear our discussions as soon as we find out more about the game. We can kind of get an idea of who the factions are probably going to be. We can kind of get an idea of what kind of warfare we're going to be looking at. The repeating crossbow actually was supposedly developed around the time of the Three Kingdoms, so that could be kind of an interesting twist there. It's not just going to be the same spearmen, swordsmen, cavalry, artillery that we see in just about every Total War game. China did have some especially politically, but even on the battlefield, they had some very different ways of fighting. There's also a lot in the Chinese literary tradition about these like clever ways of winning battles, like floating candles across a waterway to make it, look like boats. That's very common in the Chinese tradition. It'd be very cool if we got some sort of ways to win battles in clever ways using deception like that. Not sure how they would integrate that into a traditional Total War campaign, but anyway, we're keeping an eye on it. So we'll have more on Total War: The Three Kingdoms as soon as more information is available. See you then.